Hey everyone, Beano Nintendo here, and with a bit of a shorter video because I got a big fat video essay in the works right now called The Media That Shaped My Move to Minnesota. I'll be releasing that video in chunks over on my Patreon before posting the full thing on my channel. So if you want to check out part 1 right now, which is the first 15 minutes, you can do so for as little as $1 per month. Anyway, enough calls to action for now. Let's get to the main topic of the video. One video idea that I've been holding on to for a while now is the concept of a dream fighting game roster. Pulling in characters from all of my favorite media into one roster that broadly represents my taste, while also providing a diverse array of playstyles and abilities so that the roster doesn't feel too one-note. Now, one of these favorite properties of mine has been Invincible. I've always loved the combination of superhero action with deep questions and themes, and I am especially riled up about the show after the stellar third season. So naturally, I'd want to include a character from that show on my roster. Now, the most obvious choice would be to include the protagonist, the title character. But in this particular case, we have a bit of a problem. Mark really just isn't that interesting. Now, I don't want you taking this out of context. Mark is a phenomenally written character, and I think that his moral struggles and character development are perhaps some of the strongest aspects of the whole series. But removing him from that narrative structure and placing him into 2-minute-long matches where the goal is simply to win and not to defend anyone heroically, he's not really bringing that much to the table. I believe that a good fighting game character has to deliver on at least one of two aspects: having a unique playstyle that sets them apart from the rest of the roster, or having a strong personality that can be easily conveyed within the span of a few minutes. And Invincible, well, he doesn't really deliver on either of those fronts. On the playstyle end, he's kind of just a traditional brawler. The majority of his attacks are just punches and kicks without a ton of flavor. He has no real signature moves to speak of. Now, I will concede that the Conquest fight changed my perspective on this a little bit. Bro used his head more than most brawlers I've seen, and he got a bite in there too, which, yeah, isn't all that common, but I think it's important to remember the context here. Mark only used those attacks because Conquest nearly killed both his brother and girlfriend, slaughtered hundreds of innocent people, and was threatening to take over the whole planet. They were desperation moves that he absolutely would not have pulled out if he was fighting a fellow hero in a tournament setting. And sure, he is a super-powered brawler. It's not like you could just throw him into the Fight Club PS2 game and expect him to not wipe the floor with all of the regular humans there, but in the context of a crossover fighting game, super strength, super speed, and flight aren't actually unique traits. Like, throw him into multiverses and he's just a lesser version of Superman who can't shoot lasers from his eyes. Throw him into Dragon Ball FighterZ, and he's just a lesser version of one of the Saiyan characters, unable to use any ki abilities. Throw him into Marvel vs. Capcom, and he's just cooked, generally. I genuinely think that over half the roster can canonically fly, and they have impressive strength feats and combat styles to boot. Hell, even in comparison to characters that many would consider weaker than him, they use their powers in more interesting ways. Look at Deku from My Hero Academia. He takes damage each time he attacks, so there's an interesting push and pull to his character where you want to charge up your attacks to do enough damage, but you don't want to take too much recoil in the process. That push and pull isn't really there with Invincible. He just hits stuff hard until he wins. But I know what you're thinking. Omni-Man made it into Mortal Kombat 1, and he's basically just a stronger version of his son. In fact, Omni-Man made it as part of a character pack that also included Homelander from The Boys, who has pretty much all of the same abilities plus laser vision. So what made that crossover appearance work when I'm arguing that Invincible couldn't effectively cross over in the same way? Well, it comes down to the second factor, personality. Omni-Man became a fan favorite in Invincible Season 1 because of just how ruthless he acted whenever he went mask off to fight for the Viltrum Empire. Mortal Kombat is full of selfish asshole fighters who just want to tear each other apart, so personality-wise, Nolan was a totally natural fit, and you can see this reflected by videos of his pre-match banter with other cast members, ranking up thousands of views on YouTube. Mark would never willingly join a tournament like this, and while unwillingly joining could make for an interesting conflict in a story mode, I definitely think that NetherRealm made the right call by choosing an Invincible character fighting for world domination rather than against it. And I think it's a decision that could be made again in the future. It'd be cool to see a future game introduce Conquest, Anissa, or Thrag, especially now that Omni-Man is undergoing a redemption arc in the TV show. Still, I think that Mortal Kombat is sort of a special case where extremely violent characters thrive, and I don't think a Viltrumite would make quite as much sense in any other fighting game. So, who would I add instead? Well, honestly, just about anyone would be more interesting from a moveset perspective. Shapesmith could be a grappler with ridiculous range, Duplicate could use her clones in interesting ways, Monster Girl could turn into her monster form in short bursts, but take damage if she stays in for too long. Hell, even the normal human characters could be interesting. Have D.A. Sinclair send out a bunch of Reanimen, or have Cecil teleport around the stage. Though, I do think Angstrom would make for a more interesting teleporting character, because he's got the balls. Still, if I had to narrow it down to just one character, I think the choice is pretty obvious. There is only one character in the Invincible cast with near infinite moveset potential, and that's Adam Eve. In the Adam Eve special alone, she turns paper into glass, exercises psychic control over both existing objects and projectiles that she creates from scratch, flies around on an energy disk, generates floating platforms beneath her feet, propels herself with sparks from her hands, creates a steel wall out of thin air, turns cloth into metal, traps her opponent's legs in stone, karate chops a goddamn truck, traps an opponent inside a bunch of energy spikes, creates flames around her feet to increase her movement speed, dances around with giant buzzsaws on her hands, creates a Steven Universe-style bubble barrier, pulls her failed experiment brother away with an energy parachute, wraps people up in an energy lasso that she then turns into a spiked wrecking ball, gives herself power armor, and then basically turns Super Saiyan at the end. Admittedly, her use of powers feels a lot more limited in Seasons 1 and 2, but Season 3 shows her do even more crazy shit. Like in the Mr. Liu fight, where she envelops herself in energy to be used by Invincible as a human wrecking ball. Or in the Conquest fight, where she increases the density of the air around him to stop him in place before suffocating him in an energy bubble, and then pelting him with iron spike balls, axes, and spears. Not to mention the second time we see her inhibitors lifted to fire a giant fucking laser at him that burns off his skin and ultimately turns the tide of battle in the hero's favor. Which, you know, if this game has any equivalent to hyper combos or final smashes, it's gotta be that, right? So, yeah, if I ever made a Dream Fighting Game roster, Eve is definitely going to be in it, and Mark's not, but that isn't to say that I think that there are zero circumstances where he'd deserve to be a fighter. If there's ever a dedicated Invincible fighting game, he'd obviously have to be in that, and I think in that particular circumstance, his basic fighting style actually works to his advantage. You want your mascot character to be easy to pick up and play, so Mark fits that role perfectly. I also don't necessarily think that I'm going to hold this stance forever. Invincible could really surprise me in later seasons by developing new powers and/or a fighting style all his own. But as it stands now, I think he'd be better served as the inspiration for a few of his girlfriend's alt costumes in her fighting game debut. Regardless of how he develops, though, I hope none of the comic readers spoil it in the comments, because that'd super suck. And you know what else would super suck? You not liking or subscribing. But until next time, this is Beano Nintendo signing off.